Loving Sai Ram and greetings from Prashanti Nilayam. I wonder if you have ever heard the word Noetic. It is spelt Noetic, and it rhymes with the word poetic that we all are familiar with. This word Noetic appears to have been coined recently, and I certainly could not find it in my dictionary. Why am I talking about Noetic today? Thereby hangs a tale which I shall presently unfold. My story starts one morning a couple of months ago. There I was seated for the morning darshan, and opposite me across the veranda was an American, about 40 plus I would say, sporting a thick moustache. He was a doctor, I was told. Later I found out that his name was Dr. Krukov, and that he was a cardiac surgeon in the Veterans Administration Hospital in Durham, North Carolina, United States. A hospital that has close links with Duke University there. Dr. Krukov apparently had come many years earlier to Puttaparthi at the time of one of the cardiac conferences that were held during the early days of Swami's big hospital here. By the way, 3 conferences were held at that time, and they all were attended by famous surgeons from many parts of the world. Dr. Krukov came to Puttaparthi this time with 2 objectives in view. The first, of course, was to have Swami's darshan once more. But there was another reason also. It appears that the BBC and the Discovery TV channel had teamed up to produce a film on a medical project that Dr. Krukov was engaged in. And the BBC TV crew had come to Puttaparthi along with Dr. Krukov to do some location shooting. Why? This exactly is where the word Noetic comes into the picture, along with another word, mantra. Don't worry, I shall explain everything soon. Let me start with the word Noetic. This word is often used along with the word therapy. Noetic therapy simply means a non-pharmacological method of reducing anxiety, stress, pain, etc. As all of us are aware, a patient suffering from pain, etc. is normally administered drugs in order to give relief. However, drugs are not the only solution. For ages, people have tried other methods for reducing stress, anxiety, etc. All methods essentially employing some kind of a human approach to the patient. What Dr. Krukov is currently engaged in is to study quantitatively in the strict scientific tradition the effect of these alternate therapies. The project he is engaged in is called MANTRA, which is an acronym for Monitoring and Actualization of Noetic Training. Well, what exactly is this mantra, and how did Dr. Krukov get started on this? Let me take up the second question first, and I shall deal with it by quoting the learned doctor himself. But before I do that, I must mention that the quote is from an interview that Dr. Krukov gave to Bonnie Horrigan and is printed in the May 1999 issue of the journal Alternate Therapies. Incidentally, closely associated with Dr. Krukov is Susan Crater, and prior to starting on the Mantra project, they both were involved in dealing with patients with advanced heart disease, patients who were often close to death. These two, Dr. Krukov and Susan Crater, quite casually perhaps, used at that time to talk to patients in a philosophical manner, besides of course administering all the standard medical treatment. Over a period of time, they discovered, much to their surprise, that the mortality rate, which till then was about 33%, came down to 3%. Was this an accident, a coincidence, or was there something more to it? Meanwhile, Dr. Krukov became associated with a group of American doctors involved in planning the super specialty hospital in Puttaparthi. At this point, I shall let Dr. Krukov speak for himself. Quote, "This hospital is a 300-bed, 2 digital catheterization, 5 operating theatres, state-of-the-art, free care facility that was built by Sri Sathya Sai Baba in a very rural area where, until recently, there was no electricity and most people had never seen a toilet, much less a cath lab. We were involved in the original design. At the end of the first year of operation, the hospital hosted a symposium to review its activities. The day before the symposium, we went around the hospital and found ourselves immersed in something we had never seen before. In the hospitals in America, everyone basically fights off depression. Patients don't want to be in a hospital and their families are worried about them. Cardiovascular disease is almost always shrouded in a life and death atmosphere, and in the Western world, death is taken as a bad thing. But the patients in the institute in Puttaparthi, patients who could hardly breathe and were waiting for catheterization or surgery or who had just had surgery, were beaming. And as we went from bed to bed, they just beamed. It was a very different kind of atmosphere than we had ever walked through in a hospital setting. And the reason everyone was beaming was very clear. This was God's hospital. End of quote. After this visit to Puttaparthi in the early 90s, Dr. Krukov was convinced that healing had other dimensions to it than mere procedures and medicines. And slowly the mantra project took shape. 4 types of Noetic treatment were considered for use in the mantra project as supplement to all the medical treatment that was normally administered. These 4 procedures were stress relaxation, imagery, touch therapy, and prayer. Imagery means talking soothingly to the patient about a place liked by the patient, thus relaxing him or her. Relaxation by touch seems to be an adaptation of various Oriental techniques, the details of which do not concern us now. It might, however, be noted or mentioned that bedside therapies such as stress relaxation, imagery, and touch therapy were accompanied by helping the patient to adopt what is called soft abdominal breathing. Okay, all this is about bedside Noetic therapy. Incidentally, volunteers were trained who could assist in such bedside therapy. What about prayer, the 4th technique? Here, there were no bedside helpers. In this case, it was what might be referred to as distant therapy. This technique is really interesting. Each patient's name, illness, and procedure were supplied by email and phone to 8 groups in different places and belonging to different faiths. And all these groups prayed intensively for the patient. The groups involved were a church in North Carolina, a Baptist congregation again in North Carolina, a Jewish group in Israel, a Buddhist monastery in France, another Buddhist monastery in Nepal, a Catholic monastery in Maryland, and one more prayer group in North Carolina. The details are not very important. The point simply is that different groups in different places were requested to pray intensively for the well-being of specific patients. What about the results? The full details are available in the paper published in the American Medical Journal, which, by the way, is a peer journal of the American medical community. In brief, the results were as follows. In all, 127 patients were chosen for this trial study. 27 of these patients formed the reference sample, that is, they were not administered any supplementary Noetic therapy. 28 received stress relaxation therapy, 24 received the benefit of touch therapy, and 24 the benefit of imagery therapy. The remaining 24 were prayed for, shall I say. I must here add that Dr. Krukov has been very, very careful in taking all the precautions necessary in any kind of statistical study, which incidentally is quite common in agricultural science and in pharmacology, to mention two examples. What about the actual findings? Well, in general, it was found that there was about 25 to 30% reduction in adverse outcomes in the case of patients who got extra Noetic treatment as compared with patients who did not. In particular, the best results appear to be for patients assigned to offset prayer. Of course, Dr. Krukov is very careful to stress that these results are A. quite preliminary, B. merely suggestive, and C. that further and more detailed studies are required to confirm the present positive indications. The results have aroused widespread interest, especially the prayer part. The Time magazine has done a cover story. There has been a TV story on the ABC network. There have been many magazine interviews and so on. And as I mentioned earlier, the BBC and the Discovery Channel are collaborating on producing a full documentary, for which purpose they came here with Dr. Krukov. There are, of course, people who have great reservation about this entire exercise. A medical doctor named Gary Posner is quite critical and dismisses the whole study with the caustic remark, "I suspect that 50 years from now, people looking back at this kind of prayer research will shake their heads and call it junk science." Stanley Hauerwas, professor of divinity in Duke University and hailed by the Time magazine as America's most influential theologian, comments, and I quote, "This study seems to say that what we really care about is not God but our health. That makes God a function of our narcissistic needs. I don't think God wants to play these kind of games." End of quote. Okay, so much for the Mantra project, what it is all about and what people think about it. When Dr. Krukov came here a few months ago, I knew nothing about this project. But recently I was given a file complete with copies of the scientific paper, Time magazine article, various web printouts and so on. Given my own scientific background, I became quite interested in all this material and studied the folder with keen interest. I then put the folder away and began to reflect. The basic question in the minds of all these people seemed to be, does prayer really work or does it not? This is an age-old question. It has been asked any number of times and it will continue to be asked till the end of time itself. The funny thing is that a clear answer to this question exists, yet the question gets asked again and again. Why? There lies the basic problem with man. God has given man a head as well as a heart. I mean a spiritual heart, that is. If it is the head that is asking the question, it would never be able to grasp the answer, no matter how many times the answer is repeated. And forever, the head would be subjected to doubts. With the heart, the situation is different. Prayer is a communication addressed to God, whose permanent residence is, of course, the heart, as Baba often reminds us. Thus, the heart readily understands the language of the heart, and no surprise in that at all. In other words, the heart is easily able to comprehend when prayer works and also how. Many of you may be aware of the famous story of how Savitri actually brought her dead husband back to life with prayer. Mind you, this is not mere cure, but bringing back from the dead. Skeptics may, however, dismiss this as mere legend. Okay, in that case, let me quote for you this piece from Kasturi's book Satyam Sivam Sundaram about the value of prayer. Kasturi says, and I quote, "Listen to the experience of Dr. V.D. Kulkarni of Chachan in Bijapur district. He writes on 2nd November 1961, a Muslim lady aged 60, Baduma Kasim, suffering from pneumonia in both lungs, was admitted in my clinic last month. On the fourth day, I came home at about 8 p.m. after examining all patients and finding them progressing well. About midnight, however, her son came running to me and I hastened to the clinic to find that her heart was sinking. I administered Coramin orally and by injection and waited for an hour by her bedside but found it ineffective. The son started weeping in despair. I came home at 1 a.m., had a bath, did puja to the picture of Bhagavan Sri Sathya Sai Baba and prayed. My efforts have all become vain. I know no other course except to surrender to you. On you now is the responsibility of making her come out alive. I then quietly took to bed but could not get sleep. Even before sunrise, I hurried to the clinic. I found Baduma sitting up. What happened last night? Had anyone come? I asked her. Yes, she replied. On this bed near my pillow, someone with a pile of hair sat. He placed his hands under my ears and stroked the face softly, so I could rise and sit up. I showed her the small photograph of Sri Sathya Sai Baba I had with me. Yes, this very person, she said. How lucky is this Muslim woman. She got a new lease of life through his divine touch. That is the end of quote from Kasturi. From just prayer for cure, let me move on to the revival of the dead. There is, for example, the famous Walter Cowan incident, about which most of you must surely be aware. I have read a 30-page account of the entire Cowan episode compiled by late Dr. Hislop. In brief, Walter Cowan, who had come to Madras along with his wife, Elsie, passed away, and Swami brought him back to life. Walter Cowan's revival back to life is also described briefly by Kasturi in Satyam Sivam Sundaram. The important point here is that Walter's wife, Elsie, did not even know that Walter was actually dead. And without any prayer from her side, Walter was brought back to life. What does this show? It shows that when one has intense love for God, then God acts even without a prayer. Hislop describes an incident where he was miraculously saved from an accident. One evening, while returning from Vrindavan to Bangalore city by a taxi, Hislop's car was speeding towards a head-on collision with a car racing from the opposite direction. Hislop and party were saved even though they did not even think of praying to Swami. The following morning, Swami told Hislop that since he, that is Hislop, had surrendered, it was Baba's responsibility to save him, even without being asked. At this point, I think I should quote from a very important conversation between Hislop and Bhagwan regarding the entire issue of prayer, Swami responding and curing and all that. Once, at an informal gathering, a devotee asked Baba, Swami, what is the secret of the cure that many afflicted people experience in your presence? Baba replied, my love flows out to everyone, for I see everyone as myself. If a person reciprocates my love from the depth and purity of his heart, my love and his love meet in unison, and he is cured of his affliction. When there is no reciprocity, there is no cure. Hislop seems to have picked up from there, and this is how the conversation between Hislop and Baba went on from there, and I quote, Hislop, but I thought that God knows each problem, that if it were appropriate to remedy the trouble, God would do something without being asked. Swami, no. It is your duty to ask God. Words must be said, and the words must correspond to the thought. The thought must be put into a true word. It is true that divinity knows all, but he requires that the true word be said. The mother may know that to maintain life, the child needs food, but the milk is given only when the child cries for it. Hislop, it is not clear when one should ask God and when one should not. For example, there is a headache that doctors seem unable to cure. I do not ask Swami to cure the headache. I do not pray for a cure. However, in a letter Swami wrote, "How is your health? Do not worry about that. Your God is always with you, in you and around you." Swami, that is right. For you, the body identification is weakening. You have a headache today, a stomach pain tomorrow, let it go. Don't worry about it. Once Baba has told you not to worry, no need to ask him about it. Don't identify. Islam. Does Swami mean that for persons still fully identified with the body, a continuous headache might be a proper subject for prayer? Swami, yes. But why bother Swami with a mere headache? The topic of conversation between Swami and Hislop then changed to the subject of cancer, since Swami has, in a flash literally, cancelled the cancer of many a devotee. I quote again from the conversation. Swami, cancer, it develops from a small pustule. There is inflammation, some gas, and from this the cancer develops. Hislop, can Swami cure cancer even in terminal cases? Swami, oh yes. A certain person whom you know is a good example of that. She was filled with cancer. The doctors gave up, removed tubes, sewed up incisions, and gave her only a few days to live. Now she is strong and healthy and works all day. Hislop, does Swami effect such a cure only when the karma of the person is appropriate? Swami, no. If Swami is pleased with that person, he heals that person at once. Karma cannot come in the way. Hislop, this is extremely important information because when people fail to get cured, they put it down to the fact that they still have some karmic debt. Swami, if the person has a pure heart and is faithfully following the teachings of Swami, Swami's grace is automatic. No karma can come in the way. Hislop, Swami, people make conflicting statements about the use of vibhuti. Should a devotee of Swami use vibhuti as the only treatment for sickness and injury? Swami, do not give any importance to minor sickness or injury. In more serious matters, it is best that the prayer be made to Swami. This is important. Vibhuti may or may not be used, but there should be prayer. Hislop, how about the help that is ordinarily available? Swami, some people have faith in doctors and some people have faith in Swami. Hislop, but Swami, that exactly is the problem. People are afraid that if they use anything other than Vibhuti, they are demonstrating lack of faith in Swami. Swami, actually, both can proceed together. The doctor can be consulted and Vibhuti also can be used. But regardless of the degree of faith, it is best to pray to Swami for his grace. Hislop, some devotees go to the extreme. No matter how serious the disease or the trouble, they declare that they will use only Vibhuti and never go to a doctor. Swami, if they wish to do that, they may. Swami's preference is that ordinary means of help be given their due place. That is the end of the quote of the conversation between Swami and Hislop. There are so many things I would like to say on the subject of prayer, but there is no time for all that, at least today. Maybe some other time. I would, however, like you to hear this audio clip that speaks for itself and tells you what prayer can and does achieve.
Finally, let me tell you a small incident. My personal experience. One day I was sitting on the heart-lung machine and we were doing a case of congenital heart surgery. However, at the end of the case, we were not able to come off bypass. That is, we were not able to make the patient's surgically corrected heart beat on its own. So we went back on the heart-lung machine and we rested the heart. We added many drug supports and we tried again. In this manner, 5 hours passed in the surgery. I was relieved by a colleague of mine and I came out. And really, our years of association with Swami sometimes come in use in this way. Probably it was he only who planted this thought in me. As I came out, I was really tired. I had been there in the operation theatre for 5 hours. And as I came out, a thought struck me. Look, this patient is seeming to be very bad. Will the patient come out? Why not try prayer? I don't know where this thought came from. But I thought, would prayer work for a patient like this whom I don't even know? Actually, that is the only reason why it did work. When you can pray for somebody whom you don't even know, when you can contact that divine source of energy that is all pervasive and make it concretize where it is required, that is when it really works. I said a small prayer there while standing in the corridor. There was nobody else. I tried to visualize Bhagwan's face, and I made a small appeal to Bhagwan in my own childish way. I said, Swami, this patient, we don't know whether it will make it. You alone can help it. And then, since I was so tired, I went to eat food and I went back into the theatre. When I entered the theatre, the entire picture had changed. The monitor, which shows the important parameters of the patient's blood pressure and ECG, was a totally different picture. Everybody was surprised. The patient's heart had just come back as if there was nothing wrong with it. I said nothing, and the whole matter ended there. The patient was shifted to the ICU, then shifted to the ward, and the patient went home. The next Sunday, when I was seated in the darshan, Bhagwan suddenly came up to me. He looked at me with a lot of mercy. With that wonderful wave of his hand, he created Vibhuti Prasadam, put it into my hand and gave me an additional push and said, "This is for that patient whom you prayed for."
I suppose I have said enough to convince you about the efficacy of prayer. Before I conclude, I wish to draw your attention to what Swami once said about the relative perspectives of spirituality and science. He said, and I quote, "All scientific investigations are based upon the intellect. All spiritual explorations are based upon the heart or consciousness. In the spiritual field, man alone is important and not the machines. Scientists put their faith in machines. The spiritual seekers place their faith in mantras. One is a scientist and the other is a saint. The saint believes in fullness or purnatva. The scientist is content with the half the circle. Spirituality represents the full circle. The beginning and the end meet in full circle. When this circle is divided by half, you have half a circle resembling the letter C. The C is science. It starts at one point and ends in another. And between these 2 points, there are endless doubts." End of quote. So you see, as long as the efficacy of prayer is explored scientifically, doubts will never cease, no matter how tight and rigid the experiment is. I shall conclude with what Dr. Bhatt often says. By the way, Dr. Bhatt is 80 plus and is still going strong in Swami's hospital with a heart attack behind him. Dr. Bhatt observes, "The surgeon merely cuts. It is God who actually heals." In all of Swami's hospitals, this is the guiding principle. Jai Sai Ram.